My friend, Pastor Mike, learned this a few years ago because what he saw is that people come to church and they kind of have the happy Christian face on and everything's fine and all is well. And he'd be like, okay, let's find out what's really going online, right? And he'd go onto their Facebooks and their MySpace and he'd see a whole different list of pictures and images and struggles and doubts and fears that people were living. And because he would go through these internet sources and was actively engaged in MySpace and Facebook, it was totally appropriate because he was friends with them online to begin talking and speaking into these issues and helping shepherding these individuals back into a closer, more intimate relationship with Jesus Christ. And so yes, we can take the approach that technology is a foe, but I believe we are much wiser, particularly with this next generation, of viewing it as a friend and harnessing it to advance the gospel. Last night I thought we saw an incredible display of that with the individual movies that were made. There was that one film that was made by a 14-year-old who's telling the story of what God is doing within his church community. How can we as leaders raise up those young filmmakers to tell the stories of what God is doing in our own communities? The next thing that I noticed in my research regarding this generation was that 20-somethings often struggle in their transition to adulthood. And this is something that has been appearing at the academic levels for a number of years and is now just beginning to filter down. And this is something that I saw when I lived in Steamboat and nannied for a family of 4 for about 5 years. And the schedule as a nanny is that I would wake up early in the morning. I would start popping those kids out of bed. Then I would get food in them as fast as I could, put them back in the Suburban, right, and drive them to Christian school. I would drop them off at school, and about 2:30 in the afternoon, I would begin swinging by so I could pick them up and funnel them through piano lessons. When we were done with piano lessons, depending on the season of year, we would then go to whatever sports event it might be, whether it was football or soccer or gymnastics or ice hockey or whatever it might be. And so we'd go. And then after that, they might have Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or another sporting event. And then finally, I would get them all back home. Meanwhile, I have a cooler in the back of the Suburban with the box juices and the yo-go sticks. We know what we're talking about here, right? And so we're living this go, and swinging through the drive-through of McDonald's. And we're doing this. And then eventually we'd get home. And it'd be about 6:30 at night. And then guess what time it was? Time for homework. And so we'd sit down and we'd do homework. And hopefully by about 8 o'clock, I'd have fed them somewhat of a nutritional meal and gotten their homework done. And then if they were really lucky, they'd get about 30 minutes of time to watch television and decompress. And then I would put them in bed, and then I would wake up the next morning and do it again, day after day after day. And what we see in our culture is this high-speed, high-pressure kind of race going on among children, where it's no longer an issue of peer pressure as much as it is one of parent pressure. And that when your child comes home from a game, the question is no longer, how did you play or how did it go, but did you win? And the question is no longer how many B's and C's, but how many A's are on your report card. And so what they have found, according to Psychology Today, is that in this process of being overmanaged, that they are being robbed of identity, meaning, and a sense of accomplishment. This is Psychology Today speaking, to say nothing of a real shot at happiness. Forget, too, about perseverance, not simply a moral virtue, but a necessary life skill. These turn out to be the spreading psychic fault lines of 21st century youth. Whether we want to or not, we are on our way to creating a nation of wimps. This is Psychology Today speaking about how the overmanaged and the hyper-busy culture of today is affecting children. I don't know if you guys remember, but 30 or 40 years ago, when kids were out in the play yard at their school, they would find like rusty nails, right? And you'd fall down and you'd skin your knee. But if you go to a play yard today, they're completely padded. Everything is perfectly clean. Heaven forbid a child should fall and scrape their knees. Well, the problem with this, psychologically, is if you grow in an environment that you can never get hurt, then how are you supposed to grow? Interestingly, in the United States today, there are 40,000 schools that no longer have recess. How do you talk to a youth about what it means when Jesus says that we are to come away to a lonely place and rest for a while when there's no downtime in your schedule? What they're discovering is this hyper-managed, this hyper-go-go lifestyle is starting to have some repercussions as this generation comes of age in college. And what they're seeing is that as they enter college, there is an increased amount of anxiety, depression, self-mutilation, and substance abuse, including drugs and alcohol. In 1988, the number one problem on college campuses was relationships. I'm not getting along with my boyfriend, having some issues with my mom, I'm not quite sure about my friendship circle. But by 1996, the number one issue on college campuses was anxiety, the stress and pressure that kids are feeling. According to the University of Michigan Depression Center, they estimate that 15% of college students nationwide are suffering from an anxiety disorder, and 14% are suffering from depression. At Cornell University, 12% of the student population of 20,000 students sought mental health services during the past year, marking a 63% increase over the year before. At colleges around our nation, they literally cannot hire health workers fast enough in order to keep up with the pressing needs of the student populations. Meanwhile, anorexia and bulimia affect more than 40% of women at some time in their college career. What does this mean to you as a mission as you reach this next generation? It means that as the young adults wander into your congregations and they sit down and they begin sharing what's going on in their life, you are probably not going to fix it in 45 minutes at Starbucks. Are we tracking? It is a wonderful start. But recognize that some of the issues that people are coming to your churches with are deep and they are very, very real. And make no mistake, Jesus Christ is the answer. He is ultimately the healer. He is ultimately the resurrection power. He is the one that we turn to every single time. But at the same time, recognize that there are people who will come to you who honestly need a professional counselor. And that is why it is so important to have those relationships within your community where you can point people to professional and affordable counselors that are Christian, where they can get help. Secondly, I think that as our generation, that it is essential that as leaders, we take the stigma out of getting help. One of the most healthy things I ever did, also one of the most difficult, was that I lived in Sitka and Juneau, Alaska for 5 years. And living up in Southeast Alaska is something pretty difficult. Because in Southeast Alaska, it rains about 300 days a year, okay? And if that wasn't enough, in the winter, you're arm wrestling 18 hours of darkness. So not only is it dark for 18 hours and you only get 6 hours of daylight, but it rains all 6 hours for 20 or 30 days in a row. These are great times. And living in the culture of Alaska, the question is not, do you wrestle with depression? No, everybody does. The question is how are you dealing with it? This is an area of the country where they ship in the happy lights by the pallet. All right? And what happens, though, in that kind of environment is that all of a sudden, when we speak openly about the struggles and the difficulties and the challenge with depression, people start serving and loving each other and supporting each other and helping them get through another winter. And I believe as the church and working with this generation, we have got to create a similar type of atmosphere where we can come alongside and support people who need to get the help that they need. That we can come alongside and encourage and love and build up and point people to a relationship with Christ. I also think that one of the repercussions that people are discovering is that with this overmanaged, hyper-busy lifestyle, that often young adults are pushing back on adulthood. And some of you have seen this in your own homes. But there have been studies done where they have looked at some of the benchmarks of what it means to become an adult. And what they're discovering is that people are taking more time to grow up. In 1960, they looked at these classic benchmarks, things like, maybe buying a car, or buying a home, or having a full-time job, or health benefits. And in 1960, 65% of males had reached adulthood by age 30. But in 2000, only 31% had. Among women, the figure for reaching the benchmark of adulthood dropped from 77% to 46%. And what social scientists are discovering is that within this generation, there used to be adolescence, that teenage period, and now they've coined a new term called adultessence. And it's the stage where people in their 20s are still trying to figure out what's going on. Often when they come into your churches, they're going to be a little bit hesitant to sign up for a new activity or lead something or make another commitment. And the reason is because they've grown up in their houses with these overmanaged, overbusy schedules, and all of a sudden, for the first time in their life, they don't have to. And they don't think that they're ready to or they want to, and they're really hesitant to step forward. And so they're kind of pushing back and trying to figure out who they are and how things fit. And I say that to you just to let you know that if you sense the frustration of getting young adults to commit to something, you are not alone.